Hi guys, it's me, CHD, and welcome to another episode of the podcast where today, of course, we are reviewing the Bahrain Grand Prix, which happened yesterday, and it was a pretty exciting weekend. We had probably, from start to finish, the best Grand Prix of the season. I know we had a lot of excitement towards the end of the Australian Grand Prix a few weeks ago, but there were boring patches of that race. This race in Bahrain, again, from start to finish, it was very, very exciting. And we had many overtakes. I lost count of the amount of overtakes, really, we had. It was just unbelievable, the amount of racing that was going on in that Grand Prix. And the one great thing from it was, even though McLaren still do have clearly the best car, and they did comfortably win the race, the field is still so close compared to what we've seen in recent years. And that's why the Grand Prix was so exciting. And we will get more of these as the season goes on. Just depends on the tracks we race at. But yeah, it was an exciting weekend. Obviously, qualifying, we had a very mixed up grid. And then the race was just pretty crazy as well. So very much enjoyable Grand Prix weekend. Let's first, though, get into, of course, your race results for the Bahrain Grand Prix. And the first driver to take 2 wins this season, Oscar Piastri, wins the Bahrain Grand Prix. What a drive this weekend. Got pole, easily won the race. He didn't lead every lap, but he was pretty much the leader for the whole weekend, really. In practice, he was supremely quick and just continued that through the rest of the weekend. A brilliant weekend from the Australian. George Russell second, a brilliant weekend from him also. Very important as well for the championship, his weekend. And yeah, what a drive from Russell, who is without doubt a championship contender. Lando Norris in third, tricky weekend for him. Leclerc fourth. Bit unlucky, Leclerc. Had a really great race, and Ferrari, strategically, I thought had a great race, but were unlucky with the safety car coming out when it did. Lewis Hamilton fifth, bit of a better race for him. Max Verstappen sixth. Obviously, Red Bull were awful this past weekend, and he only just beat Pierre Gasly in seventh. What a weekend for Gasly and Alpine, who are now off the mark for the season in terms of points. Esteban Ocon finishing in 8th, another brilliant result for Ocon and the Haas team. Yuki Tsunoda in 9th, good result for him, given that the Red Bull car is still so tricky to drive, finishing just over 10 seconds behind Verstappen. I know there was a safety car in the race, but still, that is a good weekend for Tsunoda. And then, from last to 10th, Oliver Behrman completing a great race for the Haas team. Yeah, what a wacky top 10, especially given what the starting grid was for the Bahrain Grand Prix. It was, quite a bit different than how the top 10 ended up in the Grand Prix. But those are the race results. But let's get on to how that affects now the championship standings. Lando Norris is still in the lead, but only now by 3 points from teammate Oscar Piastri, who is very much in better form than his teammate Norris. Max Verstappen, despite the poor weekend, is third and only 8 points off the championship lead. I know he's had a miserable weekend and he's been very disappointed with how bad his Red Bull car's been, but it is still, he's not in a bad situation still, given how far off Red Bull are compared to McLaren. George Russell fourth, again, having a great season, and like I said, no doubt a championship contender. Charles Leclerc in fifth, a big drop-off between Russell and Leclerc, 31 points, and I think at this point, you'd have to say there are only 4 drivers in the Drivers' Championship battle. Leclerc fifth, just ahead of Antonelli in 6th, who of course did not score any points somehow in that Bahrain Grand Prix. Even though Antonelli was seemingly overtaking loads of cars, he still ended up with no points. Lewis Hamilton in 7th now, Alexander Albon 8th, Esteban Ocon in 9th, Lance Stroll still P10, even though the cars, or other drivers rather, are closing in behind. On the constructor side, McLaren are pretty clear of the rest of the field. They are on 151 points. Mercedes still yet to break the 100-point barrier, which they will do probably this weekend in Saudi Arabia. But Mercedes are in second, 22 points clear of Red Bull. Ferrari had obviously a much better weekend than what they've had recently, and they're only 14 points behind Red Bull. Haas, after a brilliant result and Williams not scoring a point, which was quite a surprise given how good they looked at times, Haas now up to 5th in the championship, 1 point clear of Williams. As I said in my race watch along, who would have thought they would be 5th in the championship after the first Grand Prix, where they look like one of the slowest teams we'd ever seen in that Grand Prix? They were so far off the pace, but here we are now, basically a month later, and they are 5th in the championship with 20 points and less than 40 points behind Ferrari. Williams 6th, only a point behind. Aston Martin in 7th. Racing Bulls 8th. Alpine up to 9th after the brilliant result from Pierre Gasly. And then Sauber are now last, even though they're level on points with Alpine. So the championship positions looking very exciting going forward. But one more thing we will do before we go any further into this review is looking at, of course, the race pace in Bahrain, which is important to look at, just to understand, obviously, why the results ended up the way they did. McLaren, on average, did a 1:37.1 in the Grand Prix, obviously with Oscar Piastri in the lead. And they were, on average, half a second quicker than Mercedes and Ferrari. Ferrari's race pace was helped a bit in this race by starting on the medium compound tyre, which really did help their speed in the first stint compared to if they had started on the soft compound tyre like everybody else. And then obviously in the second stint, they had much fresher tyres and much better pace. So I don't think Ferrari's race pace was actually that good. I think it was just they, started on the right tyre and really benefited from that, and that's why they were a lot better with their pace in the race than they normally are. So we need to just be careful with saying, Ferrari, had brilliant race pace. Yeah, they did, but it was helped by starting on the medium compound tyre. Great decision by the strategist at Ferrari to do that. And then a big drop-off to Red Bull, who were nearly 1 second a lap off the pace of McLaren, and only just ahead, as you can see, of Alpine. And with Max, starting behind Gasly on the grid, that's why Verstappen had such a hard time with Gasly in the race, because the Red Bull barely had any more pace than the Alpine during the Grand Prix. And as you can see, only a couple tenths of a second per lap quicker than the Haas car. We have seen this season Haas have been very quick in the races, and that proved to be the case yet again. But yeah, Red Bull were basically a midfield team in that race. That's the sort of pace they had. If you're a second a lap off the pace of the best team, unless that best team is also a second a lap quicker than everybody else at least, then you are pretty much midfield fodder at that point. And that's what Red Bull were in the race. And that's why I say Yuki Tsunoda, I thought, had a great weekend, because that car was not quick in Bahrain. Bit of a drop-off then to Williams, who had a disappointing race after the safety car. Racing Bulls were very disappointing. Hadjar and Lawson were really nowhere for a lot of the race. Very disappointing given how good they were in practice. Sauber were pretty much on the same pace as Aston Martin. The slowest team in the race in Bahrain. Contrast that to 2 years ago at the same Grand Prix, they were the second best team race pace wise in this Bahrain Grand Prix. That is just how far they have fallen in just 2 years. Of course, I know they're concentrating on next year's car, but it just shows how poorly of a job they have done with developing that car from 2023 to where we are now. When if you look at McLaren, who were 2 years ago pretty much in the position Aston Martin are in now, they went the other direction and now have clearly the best car. So that's the difference between one team developing very well and one team basically not developing and improving at all. Anyway, that is all the data and standings and results from the Bahrain Grand Prix. Let's get on to how it really played out and start, of course, with the race winners, McLaren. Oscar Piastri, obviously let's start with him. What a weekend he had. From really practice 2, which is the only important practice session because it's the only session that takes place, practice session that takes place in representative conditions. From that session on, it was clear that Piastri was going to be really strong this weekend. And once he got pole, there was not really any doubt, was there, that he was going to win the race. That McLaren, obviously very quick. Piastri's even acknowledged that the McLaren is a very good car and is the best car. But he delivered the result that should have been delivered, unlike his teammate. So brilliant weekend from Piastri. Now has the most wins of any driver this season. Of course, if he keeps that up by the end of the season, he will be world champion. Because if you have the most wins of any driver, normally, except for maybe the very odd season, normally you end up as the world champion. So that is a very important thing for Piastri. Lando Norris, though, I think we're going to have to talk about more so than Piastri, because Piastri's weekend was pretty boring, to be honest. He just dominantly got pole and won, and yeah, it was just a very smooth, easy weekend, really. For Lando Norris, I don't even know where to start, really. I think you could really start from before the race weekend even began, with him going on about, if Max Verstappen had, if he drove our car, he'd be surprised. And actually, McLaren, our car is not actually that good. Maybe his McLaren, the McLaren he's driving, is not feeling that good to him because he just cannot adapt to the handling of the car. But for Oscar Piastri, it's clearly working fine, and Piastri, again, has acknowledged that it is the best car. There is no doubting that. Lando, though, just constantly coming into the weekend downplaying the quality of the car, even though we know it's the best car. Everybody knows that. There's no hiding that. But Lando, because he's so aware of people's criticisms of him, he knows that, of course, putting in the results that he has done in the last couple races before the Bahrain Grand Prix doesn't look good if you're in the best car. And he knows that, and he knows especially that he'll get even more criticism for this Bahrain Grand Prix, because again, that McLaren was easily the best car all weekend, and he made it look like a car that could barely get on the podium. He did get on the podium in the end, probably should have finished in second. He attempted a very bizarre type of overtake on the final lap where he tried to go round the outside at turn 1, a move that nobody ever tries because you then put yourself out of position on the run up to turn 4, which is normally where overtakes get completed. Again, it was very bizarre, the move he attempted. But yeah, the way Lando drove this weekend, you would think the McLaren was not the fastest car on the grid. Awful qualifying, 6th on the grid, half a second nearly off his teammate, was out-qualified by Gasly in an Alpine, which, I know Gasly did a great lap, but that should not be happening in a million years in that McLaren. Norris knows that. He was very critical of himself after the Grand Prix, after qualifying, saying he drove like he had never driven a car before, and it was pathetic and all of this. Maybe was a bit too hard on himself, but he was right to be critical of himself because it was an awful performance, probably the worst performance of any driver in qualifying. And then in the race, even though he finished third, which, I predicted him to finish third, and it's still a decent result, he still leads the championship, pulled a few points on Max Verstappen, who I still think at this moment is my favourite to win the championship, so it's not the end of the world. But when you go look at the race he had, it was still very eventful. Firstly, starting out in position on the grid, really silly mistake where he was already in position, but clearly thought he wasn't in position and pulled forward massively. Max Verstappen spotted it, reported it, and then Lando got a 5-second penalty for it, which made his race a lot harder than it had to be. And you could argue cost him probably his second place and making a McLaren 1-2 in Bahrain. But, after that, obviously Ferrari went longer on their tyres on the mediums. Leclerc then passed Lando around the halfway mark of the Grand Prix. Lando was then falling away, and then the safety car came out. And really, that safety car is the reason Lando Norris finished on the podium. If the safety car had not come out, Lando would have finished at best in 4th, maybe even 5th, if Lewis Hamilton had had a really fast final 20-25 laps. Again, if there was no safety car. It was a poor performance in the race even. It wasn't as poor as qualifying, but even in the race, it was scruffy, inconsistent, and just not good enough, I'm afraid. He should have absolutely finished in second place, especially after the start he had. Brilliant start to the race, going from 6th to 3rd, and then from then on, seemingly got worse until the last few laps of the race where, on better tyres and in a very fast car, he then started to make his way through, passing Leclerc. Great move on Leclerc, I must say, at turn 4. And then, like I said, failed to pass Russell. I still don't understand the move he was trying to do on Russell at the end. It didn't really make any sense to me. I thought he was going to do what Antonelli did to Verstappen, like a switchback through turn 1, 2, and then maybe a switchback at turn 4, because Lando had much better tyres in terms of the tyre condition. That would have made sense to do that. Instead, he tried something that nobody ever tries. So, yeah, I can't explain what he was trying to do there. And yeah, poor performance. But at least for Lando, gets away with it a bit by still leading the championship. But with the way Lando's driving right now, I don't think he deserves really to lead the championship. He's not performing well right now. Not as well as his teammate, Oscar Piastri. Since the Australian Grand Prix, Oscar has clearly been better than Lando. That is not really up for debate, as far as I'm concerned. And going into this weekend's race in Saudi Arabia, of course, if you remember last year and even the year before, Piastri has delivered 2 stunning performances at this track. This Jeddah circuit is probably his best track, Piastri. So Piastri is the clear favourite this weekend to get pole and win. Lando must make sure, if Oscar is just that quick and is too quick to beat, Lando must finish in second. Cannot afford another 3rd place or, awful qualifying result. He cannot afford that to happen. He's got to keep it together. Especially at this point of the season, where McLaren do have an advantage, which I don't think is going to last necessarily all season. Look at Mercedes. Look how good they are. All they need is one big upgrade, and they'll be fighting for wins and getting wins. Same with Red Bull. Once they get an upgrade on that car, Max Verstappen will start winning races, or more races than what he's won so far. So, has to finish at worst second this weekend, Lando. For Oscar Piastri, though, if he can win this Grand Prix and take advantage of just how brilliant he is around this Jeddah circuit, 3 wins in the first 5 races, that's pretty good form if you want to win the championship. And if he can then go on to win in Miami, Oscar Piastri at that point, you may say, is the clear favourite to win the World Championship. Something I honestly didn't think I'd be saying at this point. But Oscar Piastri is, out of the McLaren drivers, definitely the better performer, and has easily been one of the best drivers on the grid this season. So absolutely deserves to be where he's at. And congratulations to Piastri, and congratulations to McLaren. First ever win in Bahrain. I couldn't believe that stat coming into the race weekend, that McLaren had never won in Bahrain. In the V8 days, they were always very competitive here, but just never got the race win. But yeah, finally they got it after, 21 years of the Bahrain Grand Prix. They finally got that maiden win at the track. Of course, they've never won in Saudi Arabia. Obviously, we've only had the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix around for, 3 or 4 years. They'll be looking to get their first win there as well. And like I said, if Piastri can win this weekend, he will take the lead of the championship, and that will be a very big moment in his season. So yeah, we will see how it goes. Piastri, I think, is clearly the favourite for this weekend's Grand Prix. Let's move on, though, to Mercedes-Benz, who had a brilliant weekend. And George Russell was easily one of the drivers of the weekend, right up there with Piastri, Gasly. You'd have to put up there as well for drivers of the weekend. Russell, he was also like Piastri, he was on it from the word go, was third in practice too. Clearly, I could see Russell had a lot of pace in Friday practice, which is why I had good hopes for him going into qualifying. And then in qualifying, put it on the front row, sadly got a one-place penalty because of a infringement, red flag infringement that Mercedes committed with both cars, which was a bit sad. But he immediately got past Leclerc into turn one. So immediately he repaired that little amount of damage, got into second, and really, for the whole race, hung on. Did get a bit close at the end, obviously with him on soft tyres, and those soft tyres were absolutely finished, and somehow held on ahead of Lando Norris for a very important result. Russell only 14 points behind after 4 Grand Prix and a sprint race. If you had told George Russell he'd only be 14 points behind going into this 5th race of the season this weekend, he would be very happy with that. Especially given this time last year Mercedes were nowhere. But this year, you've got to say Mercedes have got the second best car on the grid. Fundamentally, it's a good car. They just need, as I've said a million times at this point, they just need that one big upgrade to push them forward, and George Russell will start winning races, and he very well could win the championship this year. He really, really could. Do not count him out. He is easily, I think at this point, the dark horse for the Drivers' Championship. And God, do we have a good Drivers' Championship fight on our hands. Clearly, it's going to be at least a 4-way fight. It could even be a 5-way fight if maybe Antonelli starts to, bang some great results in soon. So yeah, Russell, top weekend. Also did very well to stay ahead of Leclerc right before the safety car, because Leclerc was really quick and Russell was able to keep him just over a second back. That was really crucial as well in helping his Grand Prix. So yeah, what a weekend from Russell. For Antonelli, I'd say a good weekend. Qualifying, I think he did the best he could. Still was lagging a couple tenths behind his teammate, but Russell is just performing at such a high level right now. That's why Antonelli was only, 4th, but then dropped back to 5th because of the one-place penalty. In the race, though, even though he didn't have the greatest start, plenty of great overtakes before the safety car. Switchbacks on Verstappen, I think Sainz also, Gasly. Really good racecraft from Antonelli, and showing further signs as to why we all hype him up so much, because at 18 years old, he is incredibly talented and still very, very quick. Just isn't the finished article yet, and you're not going to be 18 years old, so yeah, there is a lot more to come there. But then with the safety car coming out, it really hurt Antonelli's race, because Antonelli pitted a couple laps before the safety car came out, and then they decided to pit Antonelli again for another set of soft tyres. And then Antonelli got stuck in the DRS train and couldn't make his way through. The Mercedes was one of the slowest cars down the straights. So, yeah, it was always going to be tough for Kimi, but he had the pace, I think, definitely to finish at least in 8th place after the safety car, but again, got stuck in a DRS train, which in that Mercedes is a bit hard to break. And he had very talented drivers ahead of him who were really having great races themselves. Obviously, his ex-Formula 2 teammate, Oliver Behrman, just ahead of him. But yeah, Antonelli, again, showing signs that he is going to be one special driver in the future. And once it clicks, he will be one of the, if not the most elite in Formula One. It's going to be incredibly exciting to see the future of this kid. And I don't think he's far away from it clicking even just this season. He's got good pace. It's not as good as his teammate. Again, Russell is performing at a very high level, so it is hard. But he will get better, every Grand Prix. We're now racing, or at least this weekend, he has raced around the Jeddah circuit before from last year in F2. So he does have, thankfully, experience from before. But once we get to the European season, where he has plenty more experience around tracks like Imola, Monaco, obviously Barcelona, the tracks that all the young kids race around in junior formula so much, if it does click around then, and Mercedes do jump forward with an upgrade, don't just expect Russell to be fighting for wins. Antonelli will be there as well. He will absolutely be there as well. So, yeah, I think we've got a triple header in, I think, starting in about a month. I think it's Imola, then Monaco, then Spain. I think by the end of that triple header, Antonelli is going to have to start beating Russell. Not all the time, but at least once every 2 or 3 races, he's going to have to be, right there, if not beating Russell. Because I don't think he can afford to spend the whole season behind Russell like he is at the moment. Again, we have to kind of tolerate it because, he is still so young and George Russell is one of the best drivers on the grid. So, yeah, again, we can tolerate it for the minute, but I think, again, by the end of that triple header, coming out the Spanish Grand Prix, he should, by then, you would hope, start scoring some podiums and maybe even getting the odd race win again if that car improves. But Mercedes, like I said, they've got the second best car. I think by now that is pretty clear. That is the second best car on the grid. And if there is any car that can beat McLaren this season, I think the Mercedes is more likely because fundamentally, compared to, say, the Red Bull and the Ferrari car, fundamentally it is a better car. That is very clear to see. Very good handling on that car. Not the greatest straight line speed, but not too bad either. They've got what they need fundamentally. They just need pretty much what they had at the Canadian Grand Prix a year ago. That front wing upgrade they had, which gave them like an extra half a second a lap. If they get that, they will be off to the races big time. Next up, we'll go on to, I think, Red Bull, because there's a lot to talk about with Red Bull in regards to Max Verstappen and his relationship with Red Bull at this current moment. Now, after the Japanese Grand Prix, much was expected of Max and Red Bull this weekend. Practice, I don't think Red Bull were that bad, and I expected Red Bull to be in the mix for the top 3, absolutely, going into qualifying. But Verstappen had a car that just was not cooperating at all. He had snaps of oversteer. He's been complaining, or was complaining, about the brakes all weekend, and the brakes even in the race. Even though they changed the brakes overnight from qualifying to the race, still, he could not brake properly. So the brakes clearly not interacting with the rest of the car properly. That is an issue they've got to get on top of. That's one of the reasons Max is so good, is because of how good he is under braking, how late he brakes as well. And if he ain't got the confidence under braking, then this is the Max Verstappen you're probably going to get. Qualifying, honestly, I thought he did the best he could given the issues he had to put up with. And in the race, again, I think he did honestly the best he could given what he had to put up with. Not just the braking issues, 2 awful pit stops, an awful strategy, going onto the hard tyres too early when the hard tyres were not really working at that point. It was just an awful race. Red Bull were terrible as a team. Not just for Max, but for Tsunoda as well. Tsunoda had to put up with the, awful pit stops as well. And that's what led to, 6th and 9th, which for Red Bull is nowhere near good enough. Max did the best he could, ended up passing Gasly very late on. Those 2 extra points for 6th, which are 8 points, that might be very important in December in Abu Dhabi. So, still an important result. For Tsunoda, again, I thought he had a really good weekend considering just the issues that Red Bull are going through. Maybe, could have passed Ocon before the end, but I thought Tsunoda this weekend, given what Max was putting up with and just what Red Bull are going through at the minute, I thought Tsunoda had a really good weekend and clearly is getting on top of this car. He's not going to be as quick as Verstappen still, but he's doing good enough at the minute from what I've seen, Tsunoda. But yeah, Red Bull, they're in trouble. They're absolutely in trouble. This weekend in Saudi Arabia, honestly, I think they're probably going to be, I wouldn't say worse than they were in Bahrain. I mean, if Max has normal working brakes, he will be faster himself because he'll have that confidence back, at least with the brakes, to be able to be quicker himself in that car. But fundamentally, I don't see the Red Bull car being that quick around the Jeddah circuit compared to the Bahrain circuit. Coming into this triple header, I was thinking Bahrain would probably be the best track for Red Bull out of this triple header of Suzuka, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And that did not prove at all to be the case. So, yeah, I am not positive whatsoever about Red Bull's chances this weekend. Max, I'm sure, will do the best he can, but I think Red Bull have got, coming into this weekend at least, I think they've got the 4th best car. If they're suffering as badly as they were in Bahrain with braking problems, they may even be like, as you saw with the race pace data earlier, they may be fighting amongst the midfield in the race. The fall off from that team has been dramatic, and it's been coming ever since the controversy at the start of last season, which caused a massive break in the team. Adrian Newey obviously left. We saw this coming, maybe not this quickly, but it's been coming. And this is where Red Bull are at. Yes, they can improve this car. The Red Bull car fundamentally is not an absolutely terrible car. It can definitely be improved upon. Max can absolutely win this championship. But if these upgrades coming, the bigger ones coming down the pipeline that should be coming at Imola, if they don't work, Red Bull are not going to have a successful season whatsoever. And Max Verstappen, no matter how good he is, if those upgrades don't work, he will not win the championship. He needs a car that is at least cooperating a bit. He doesn't need necessarily the best car, but he needs a car that can at least fight, and he doesn't have that most of the time. So, yeah, this weekend I'm not expecting it to be a great weekend for Red Bull. I think the Jeddah circuit is, with all the high-speed corners there, McLaren, Mercedes, and even Ferrari, at least in qualifying, I think will be superior to Red Bull. I hope I'm wrong, but that's how I see it going. And maybe Red Bull will be closer to the midfield than they will be to the front. But talking of Ferrari, let's quickly go on to them. Charles Leclerc, I have to commend for the weekend he had. Really strong performance this weekend. Obviously started on the front row, qualified 3rd. Really great qualifying lap to end up where he did. And yeah, he had a great race. Obviously Ferrari, brilliant decision to start both cars with a medium compound tyre. Honestly, it's what I was expecting most teams to do, but most teams decided to start the soft compound tyre, which was a surprise, and that is what led to a lot of teams going for an earlier pit stop, because a lot of them started on the soft. I know the tyres were harder this weekend, this past weekend. The tyre compounds Pirelli brought were harder than what they were last year, so that probably contributed to that. But it was a bit of a surprise to me that the other teams went for the soft to start with. But Ferrari went for the medium, and it worked out really well. Ferrari had pretty good pace in the first stint, went quite a bit longer, and then coming out of that first pit stop, both Ferraris were flying. Hamilton was overtaking loads of cars. Leclerc was very, very quick. Passed Norris for third. Was looking like he was probably going to pass Russell at some point. Obviously would have run longer on the second stint than Russell, and it would have been a very close finish. And I still maintain, as I said in my race watch along stream, if there wasn't a safety car, I think Leclerc probably just about finishes second ahead of Russell, Norris, and then maybe Hamilton fifth or fourth. Who knows where he would have been in the end. That's how I think things would have played out. But unfortunately for Ferrari, the safety car came out. They did not get it right with what tyre they went on to when they pitted. They went for the hard compound tyre. Maybe that's because they didn't have any mediums left. So if that's the case, then I'll forgive them for that. But if they did have a set of mediums left for both drivers, that's what they should have gone for. That would have helped keep Leclerc probably on the podium. But they didn't have enough pace on the hard compound tyre, and they dropped from the podium, and both cars ended up fourth and fifth. And yeah, they had a good race pace. The result was, not too bad, but yet again, failed to get a podium. Fourth and fifth only for the two Ferrari cars. And at this point, it's over. The championship is over for them. On the driver's side, Leclerc is now, 45 points behind, I think, Lando Norris. That gap is only going to grow because McLaren are still clearly quicker than Ferrari, and they are going to be probably still for another few races. And on the constructors' side, McLaren are over, or almost over 100 points clear after just 4 races. So, as far as I'm concerned, it is over. Ferrari and their drivers will not be winning a championship in 2025. It's a shame to say, but fundamentally that car just is not good enough. I'm sure it will improve. They will win races this year, but they are not winning a championship. That is just clear to see. We'll see how they improve going forward, but I think from now on it's just, forget about the championship and just get out there and go for it and see what happens, and just try and get the best results they can for the rest of the season. And I think more so as the season goes on, they need to try and focus on next year's car, which is very important for the future of Ferrari going forward for the rest of the 2020s decade. This weekend in Saudi Arabia, I think they should have a decent car in qualifying. I could see Leclerc, if he really pulls out a strong lap, maybe Leclerc could end up on the second row of the grid, which wouldn't be too bad, but I would be surprised if Ferrari are finishing on the podium this weekend. I don't think they've got as good of a car as what McLaren and Mercedes have got, especially around that type of circuit that Jeddah is characteristically. So, yeah, Ferrari, I don't think they're going to have that great of a weekend this weekend, unfortunately. So yeah, those are the front-running teams. Again, shout out to Pierre Gasly, probably the driver of the weekend. Fourth, he started on the grid, obviously benefited from the one-place penalty for Antonelli. Fifth, he was in qualifying, less than 4/10 away from pole. And then in the race, a lot of the time was running in fifth place. Obviously, other cars came through to pass him. In the end, he was not able to hang on to sixth, which was a tad disappointing, because if he had held on to sixth, then Alpine would have gone a place higher in the championship. But what I'm interested in is, with Alpine, is obviously Gasly has always been very quick in Bahrain. But we have seen that Alpine car has been decent at times this year. It's been quicker, for example, on race day sometimes than it has been in qualifying. I'm just wondering, can they keep this up to a degree going forward, or whether this is just a blip? If you look at the data from qualifying, they had the second best car in the middle sector, where all of the corners are, basically. So that points to me to Alpine having, through the corners, a very good car. We know they have the weakest power unit still. Obviously, this is Renault's final year in the sport for probably quite a while. So yeah, I'm interested to see with Alpine whether this weekend they'll keep that up or whether they'll just go back to doing what they were at Suzuka, where they were not really anywhere near the top 10. We'll have to see. But I am very curious to see whether Alpine, whether this might be their pace going forward. It would be great to see Alpine in there, because Racing Bulls and Williams have kind of dominated proceedings in the midfield so far quite a bit, in terms of especially qualifying pace. Also, shout out to Haas and Esteban Ocon, 14th to 8th on the in the Grand Prix, and obviously came back from an accident in qualifying. So brilliant drive from Ocon, who is 9th in the championship. Nobody expected that after the first 4 races. And Oliver Behrman, from last to 10th. Brilliant drive from him. If only he had not had such a poor qualifying lap, Behrman could have ended up finishing 7th or 8th in this race. He was looking good in practice, but just really failed to deliver a good enough lap at the end of Q1. So, yeah, Behrman, fantastic job by him. And Haas leading the midfield fight in the championship. As I've said before, there's a lot of potential in that car. Still, it is a bit too draggy. We've seen that with the top speed data. Their car still struggling at top speed. Once they fix that, I'm sure they'll be very, very fast. In the race, though, you can see, we saw it in Shanghai, in Suzuka to a degree, and here in Bahrain. They have got a very quick race car. Very quick race car. When, a couple of years ago, they had the worst race car. It is quite a turnaround from this team. And if they keep that up and they can eliminate this drag issue with an upgrade coming soon, Haas absolutely could end up finishing 5th in the championship. It is a possibility. It's going to be very close, though, between them, Williams, Racing Bulls, and Alpine. I think you'd have to put in that fight. Aston Martin and Sauber, I don't think are going to be in that fight whatsoever. Those two teams pretty slow, and Aston Martin look like they've pretty much given up on 2025. But guys, that is it for this Bahrain Grand Prix review. Thanks for coming along for this review, and make sure to join me for this weekend's content covering the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I'll be live at 4:30 p.m. UK time on Saturday for the qualifying watch-along. Make sure to join me for that. And then on Sunday, I will be live as usual, 2 hours before the race at 4 p.m. UK time for the 2-hour build-up and then the race watch-along. And then as usual, this time next week, on Easter Monday, I will be doing a podcast reviewing the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Next week's podcast will be uploaded quite a bit earlier on Monday than the last couple podcasts have been uploaded. These last couple have been uploaded late on Monday night. Next week's will be uploaded probably quite early because I'm going to a football match next Monday, which is in the middle of the afternoon. So yeah, I will be uploading this probably on Monday morning. So yeah, it'll be quite a bit earlier, this podcast next week, but then it should return to normal times in terms of uploading time for the Grand Prix after. But yeah, make sure to come on to that content this weekend. Hopefully I'll see you there. And until this Saturday's content, or this Saturday's stream, the next bit of content I'm doing on the channel for qualifying for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.